the type? Is it single space, double space?
These are single space, and there's 8 categories.
Excuse me, I shouldn't be laughing like that. It's not what I know, it's what they tell me that's important. What percent of your team would you say does a good job doing discovery? What percent of your team thinks they do a good job in discovery, but you know they really don't?
I feel like yours has more of a journey. Like your book definitely has this whole top to bottom. There's a kind of like life thing going on, while this is more like, should I go into this category? And I'm like throwing papers around, trying to figure this out.
There's that discomfort associated with admitting deep pain, because when you admit deep pain, you're scared.
You've reached the Tony Moze Podcast, interviewing the most influential people around the globe. He's a former psychology worker and military veteran turned tech professional and entrepreneur with the goal to educate and inspire you to fulfill your dreams. Whether that's transitioning into a new job, increasing skills, or turning your hobbies into a money-making gig, Tony shows that the world is big and opportunities are endless. And now, without further ado, the Tony Moze Podcast.
What inspired you to write this book?
So before we dive into that, first, just want to thank you very much. It is truly my honor to join you in this session. The last session we did was absolutely fabulous. This is a very skilled podcast interviewer. So I just want to let the audience know that to start. So what caused me to draft this book? Probably the best way to phrase this is a lack of knowledge on my part. And let me explain. Somehow I think I was very, very lucky in the past where I was working with colleagues who knew the importance of doing discovery. And let me share a mini story, and then I'll answer your question. This is 162 years ago, way back. It's actually last century. And I was on it's almost the same. I was on a customer call, a discovery call with one of our very best sales representatives, Carol Frischman, to a pharmaceutical company in the Southeast. And at one point, she says to this team of scientists, hey, can you walk me through your workflow and describe, what do you do? Where are the issues? Where are the challenges? What's the impact? We can talk a little bit about the value of making changes and so forth along the way. And they did. They walked her through this whole workflow. And I looked at her sharply with a question mark on my forehead as she said that. And that evening in a restaurant, I said, but Carol, why? You already know intimately how these workflows execute. And she said, it's not what I know, it's what they tell me that's important. They need to feel comfortable that I understand the workflow from their perspective. And these things went off in my brain of, I'm beginning to understand this. By the way, that's known as suffering from the curse of knowledge, where you already believe you know something. And as a result, you're not willing to listen to what might be the same, but also might be different. So moving forward in time, I was working under the impression that pretty much everybody did a good job doing discovery. And it was only as I began to roll out the great demo workshops when I began to realize that, they're not getting all the information they need to prepare a great demo. And we began to incorporate more and more discovery elements into great demo workshops until finally, and it was just really about a year and a half ago, where I had the following conversation with the head of sales, where we were talking about his team, and I asked him, it's on the back of the book, I asked him, what percent of your team would you say does a good job doing discovery? And do you remember the answer to this? Do you remember what he says?
I believe he said, first off, let me close the door so I could tell you this.
Oh, you're getting there. You're ahead. You're one step ahead, but cool. He said about 20%. And then I thought for a moment, and I followed up and I said, what percent of your team thinks they do a good job in discovery, but they really don't? And this is when he said, go ahead and say it.
I believe it was majority of them. So 80% are not doing the right. Yeah.
Exactly. And before he said that, that's when he said, hang on, let me close my door. And I hear this thunk, 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 and a ka-chunk, and then thunk, thunk, thunk. And that's when he says, about 80% believe they do a good job, but they really don't. And that's when I realized I need to draft this book. So that was the precipitating factor.
Yeah, that okay, yeah, awesome. So I heard you say before, the curse of knowledge. The wonderful, I think one of the perhaps could be the cognitive biases that we have of perhaps all levels, sales, pre-sales, to feel like you know everything enough, but you really don't. And as I'm reading this book, I'm just like, I'm thinking already of the homegrown discovery template that I've been given in previous companies, and just in my mind, I'm thinking of how all levels people are going into these customer meetings thinking they know everything, and they're just like, omitting things that's just ruining their discovery process. And again, like you just reminded me the whole idea of the curse of knowledge, that could definitely hurt us in the discovery process. So, if I'm looking into the forward, right, first 10 pages in, you have people who use this methodology, your discovery methodology from different continents. They're from North America or UK, coming from Latin America, Asia. Now, are these people who are in the forward, are they coming from companies that are like founded and headquartered in North America or UK, or are they like from other countries?
So interesting question. So let's see. The UK guy is his company is headquartered in the UK. The Latin American woman, the company is headquartered in the US. And the person from Asia Pacific, from Japan, he's headquartered in Japan. And the North American is headquartered in North America. So it's half and half.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was just, the question to lead into this question here. But I remember the last time we talked, the last podcast show, we talked about the differences with certain phrases and words and how that could affect how the prospect or just teams go about things, saying, I'm going to table this, here in America.
Right.
I'm recalling again, tabling something means to just like kind of tuck it away and go refer back to it another time. Right. And then in the UK, it means something totally different. It means like, no, let's get to this right now. Right.
Yep, exactly.
So, yeah. So so I'm thinking, with, in the forward, when I see these people coming from different parts of the world, it led me to think like, is there an instance like from this discovery methodology where culturally either the order of the template, pieces of the template, or the template as a whole could be culturally inappropriate?
So not culturally inappropriate. Actually, it's fairly carefully constructed and tested to survive and weather and actually work very well in a very broad range of cultures. That being said, I have not had the chance personally to experience all the possible cultures in the world, so there's quite likely there's going to be some errors of admission here. But fundamentally, when somebody has a serious problem that they're interested in solving, they want to be discovered. So keeping that principle in mind then gives you the, if you will, the right and perhaps even the requirement to execute discovery in a way that's going to enable both you to be able to propose a precise solution to your prospect's problems, and for your prospect to feel that you've learned sufficient information to be able to propose that precise solution. Now, subtle examples. In the book, I suggest one of the great ways to start discovery is with the about you question. So as opposed to just diving right in and saying, tell me what's painful today, well, that actually could be challenging and is challenging in many cultures. In Japan, for example, it's at least a few years ago, up until a few years ago, it's not really considered culturally acceptable to do business with somebody until you've had several meetings with them. And that several could be 7, it could be 10. You need to develop a relationship. Now, on the smaller scale of that, asking so tell me, what's your background? How did you ascend to this position of power and authority at current company? That is a way of lubricating the conversation. And the reason behind that is because people are most comfortable about talking about whom?
About themselves.
about themselves.
About
And
me.
that's what makes it, yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you. And that's what makes it comfortable to be in the conversation. So within the cultural mores, I think the methodology is designed to apply. You simply need to be aware. Even in the US and Canada, there are serious social differences in the way you are expected to engage. And just to give you sort of broad brush examples, when you're meeting with somebody in New York or Silicon Valley, they want you to get to the point right away. Conversely, when you're meeting with somebody, perhaps in Texas, or let's say some of the more relaxed states, the way of phrasing it, they want to get to know you. Tell me about your family. What sports do you like? Whose teams do you follow, etc. I'm not, by the way, very good at that because I'm a Silicon Valley child. I want to get to the point right away, but those are the cultural mores. So the methodology is designed to ease you into a comfortable, authentic discovery conversation while you map to the local cultural mores and values. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Because, and that's the reason why I came up with the question, because I think of the social mores or the social mores and etiquette where business people, how they hold business meetings vary culturally. Like the way business is done in the US is different than Japan. I heard about the whole idea of that. Some businesses, I think even in Japan, they say, let's go out to dinner first. And even if we're going to have a meeting that night, we're going to have to do it over a couple sake, some dishes of sushi. We're going to have to talk and get to know each other first before I can even start getting into business stuff.
I can tell you a funny mini story, and that is, it was doing business. I won't name the company, but we were doing business with a large pharmaceutical organization in Japan. There are several. The very first meeting that took place, we were in a basement conference room, no windows, just a door, a table, and chairs. And that was it. By the time, I think it was about the third meeting, we were actually up there on like the 25th or 30th floor with a wonderful view out across the city. These are kind of the steps you have to go through. So you could sort of tell where you were with the relationship physically on where you were in the building.
Yeah. So you wrote this book, and I got a couple questions from at first. I didn't want to, but now I do want to. Look, I have, again, I don't need to say where it's from, but I have a home built discovery template, right, that they give to us, and they say, here, have at it. I know it's not ironclad. I know that it's up for or for editing and everything like that, and even just people could even add more stuff to it, modify it and whatnot. Like, how many other methodologies, home built methodologies, have you seen, prior to writing this book?
So basically, very, very few. What you just held up, basically a script that you're either expected to follow or is designed to provide rough guidance, is about as far as most organizations go. And they tend to focus on two sets of things. Number one, pain and elements of pain. And number two, the tech stack and technical environment. So, we need to have an instance of Salesforce. We needs to have Azure. It needs to have. And if it doesn't have, then you're qualified out, for example, type of thing. Let me offer some small comments about scripts, if you will, and then we can begin to dive in to perhaps some bigger comments.
Sure.
Question: for the script you have in your hand, are the questions written out as full sentences, or are they just prompts?
Well, how about this, for example? How many business locations do you have?
How many business? Okay, so full sentences. Now, the challenge with full sentences is there's a tendency for people to do what?
Full sentences?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first thing that comes to my head is misinterpretation. I mean, just because.
Okay, two challenges. So some misinterpretation. Where I was going with this is there's a tendency for people to read full sentences just as they're written, just as you picked it up and read it out to me. Mm-hmm. And the challenge with that is really twofold. One is it sounds like what it is. It sounds like you're reading a script, and hence It feels artificial. It feels stilted. It does not feel authentic.
Yeah.
And that can damage your desire to really begin to establish an authentic trust-based relationship. So small recommendation, if you're working from a script, number one, reduce it down to individual words or brief word phrases. So read that sentence again. What was it about again? How many
business locations do you have?
Okay, so you did it perfectly. You read the exact sentence. So I would trim that to business locations, question mark.
Okay.
And then it's up to you to rephrase that using your own words. And even doing that begins to make things that much more natural sounding, that much more authentic. So I would take that whole script and I would copy it into a new document, and I would trim it back to just one or two or three words or word phrases that you then expand out when you're actually asking the questions. Is there so with respect to this script, is there a defined endpoint? In other words, how do you know you have sufficient discovery information to move forward?
You do not.
And he's shaking his head.
No, as I look at it too, I'm like, all right, I have several pages here. Yes, they have some categories. Great. Under each one has these sentences. But it's like, I don't know what if I'm using the right word, shooting from the hip, or blindly, whatever. But I feel like it's almost like a la carte, like, okay, oh, how many business locations you have? Blah, blah, blah. Let me go. Like, it's almost like I'm arbitrarily looking through this. There's no necessarily rhyme or reason, perhaps. I feel like yours has more of a journey. Like your book definitely has this whole top to bottom. There's a kind of like life thing going on, while this is more like, should I go into this category? And I'm like throwing papers around, trying to figure this out.
How many pages is that?
2, 3, 4, 5 pages.
5 pages. And what's the type? Is it single space, double space?
These are single space, and there's 8 categories.
Excuse me, I shouldn't be laughing like that. Okay, this is what prospects refer to as what? An inquisition.
Yeah.
And this is the thing that terrorizes both vendors and prospects. It's like, you can almost see it. If you're working from a script, and you see them turn the page and then the next page, it's synonymous with seeing a PowerPoint presentation before they go into slideshow mode that shows slide 1 of 157. When you see that there's 157 slides, you pretty much give up all hope of having any life for the next 2 hours type of thing. So you got to know where you're going. Everybody talks about discovery is a journey. And there are many people that say that journey is never ending. And I agree with that. And, which in this case means but, and you need to have destinations along that journey. And the first and major destination that I recommend is you will have sufficient discovery information to move forward with a crisp, focused, technical proof, great demo when you have a complete situation slide. So that destination includes then 6 elements of information for any individual. And we talked about this with the great demo stuff. With respect to any particular job title, what is that person's job title? What is that person's top level challenge or critical business issue? What are the pain points, which are the problems, reasons? What are the specific capabilities that person is looking for to solve his or her problem? What's the value associated with making a change? And what is a critical date by when this person needs to have a solution in place, and what's driving that? So with those elements in place, number one, you've got a distinct and very, very achievable destination on your, if you will, discovery journey. And when you have that information, you're actually ready to move forward with what could be one of the next steps in the sales and buying process, a technical proof demo. So let me just pause there and ask how that resonates.
Yeah, that's good. So I wanted to go back though to the homegrown versus this book. I mean, the one thing I want to note for people is that I think this is like a great foundation, a great baseline. I mean, because everything else out there is kind of hard to just I don't know. It's kind of hard to determine. You again have created where it's literally a journey. And I don't know. Before you wrote this book, you're looking at other perhaps home built methodologies, and again, I guess I wanted to ask, how about this question? Maybe it could be just reiterating it, but after looking at my old company's home built template and reading your book, I had to laugh because I can picture this forming into a business problem where companies who built these homegrown discovery templates are now coming to you to help them solve why they're not increasing for X, saving for X, or eliminating X. So let's pretend people haven't read your book yet. Like, what would you say about a team or a company who has built their home-built discovery template? Like, what would be the gaps, pitfalls, or challenges they could face by not reading your book?
So the intriguing question. My starting point, guidance or advice for those companies would be to examine some critical metrics. So metrics such as sales conversion stage timing. Are they where you want them to be, or are they taking longer than you might expect? Even more critical would be your no decision outcomes. We talked about this last time. In the industry today, enterprise software suffers about an industry average of 45% of all sales opportunities that are placed on the forecast go nowhere. They go to no decision, which represents nearly half of the sales opportunities that you and your team invest their time in. So looking at no decision rates and asking the question of your discovery templates, are we doing discovery to try to understand which of these might be most likely to end up as a no decision outcome or not? It would be a terrific one. And great demo situation slides are designed to help you basically tease that out very, very rapidly. If there's no critical business issue, people will live with the hell that they know forever. If the value equation is insufficient or understood, you're going to hear prospects say, we just didn't see the value. And correspondingly, if there's no critical date, when you ask the prospect, when do you need to have a solution in place? They'll say, I don't know. And it goes kick the can down the road forever. So sales conversions, timing and steps, no decision outcomes. And a third, I would say, would be a category of wasted demos. When Consensus did their annual study, they keep coming up with pretty much the same number each year, which is that about, from the standpoint of pre-sales practitioners and pre-sales leaders and sales leaders, approximately 30% of all the demos that are presented are perceived as a waste by the vendor teams, which means that this particular prospect either was unqualified or undiscovered or a similar kind of scenario. So by examining those metrics, then you can map back and say, well, what are we missing? And look at your scripts or your current methodologies internally or externally whatsoever, and then define, all right, if these things are happening, how do we cure these problems? And that's partly what doing discovery is seeking to do for people. Does that help?
Yeah. And then this book, I know you wrote the first book, Great Demo. That was primarily for pre-sales, correct?
Well, it was for anybody. I mean, pre-sales tend to be the most consumers of the book, but it's really written for anybody that moves a mouse. When I was swindled into a sales position after being sort of a combination of consulting and pre-sales and marketing for years and years, when I returned from my 2-year stint in Switzerland, I said, hey, I'm ready to lead marketing. And they said, ha, that's all very good. What we really like you to do is to head up the sales position in the West. And I said, ha, that's all very funny. But it turned out it wasn't. They really wanted me to, and it was a good move. But I was doing my own demos for a good 2 years, partly because I knew the products intimately, but perhaps even more importantly, because I didn't have any pre-sales resources to draw down. So I was doing my own demos. So Great Demo was really written for whoever moves the mouse. That could be pre-sales, it could be customer success, it could be marketing, it could be sales, could be partner support, you name it.
Okay. And what would you call this, right? Because I know you've been able to oversee sales operations and everything like that, business development, marketing. Like, what would you call that whole end-to-end cycle of, when a lead comes in, it goes from marketing and then business development and sales, then pre-sales and customer success. Is that all considered go-to-market, or what's a name for that whole umbrella?
Many people would call it go-to-market. Others would call it the customer journey, if you will, which is perhaps I think a better way of phrasing it, because you're looking at it from the customer's perspective or the buyer's journey. The sales process is all about getting to the order and the PO. And I think that's a severe limitation in thinking. The emergence and growth of buyer enablement ideas sort of flips that on its head and is asking the question, what can I do as a vendor to help my buyer, my champion, my buying committee make their process as frictionless and painless and rapid and successful as possible? But anybody that is customer facing, I think, is really what you're looking for in that category. Does that help?
Yeah, because the first question was great demo. Who was that catered to? Now I'm thinking, what about discovery? Who's the primary group that this is a fit for, and then who are the secondary people that are also affected or a fit for? So
that's a terrific topic. This is a huge. It depends. So. And I'll explain. The perfect universe, you have sort of business discovery, you have technical discovery, and then you have ongoing business and technical discovery. Let me break that down. In the perfect business, you would have skilled, seasoned people who understand and are skilled at doing business discovery. So these would be things like, what's the overarching reason to make a change to your prospect? Tell me about your team. Tell me about the dynamics. Tell me about the buying process. Tell me about the players. Tell me about your timing, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go through the value equations and related. That's the business side. And that would be executed by a skilled salesperson most typically. Then you have technical discovery. So you look at a lot of products and you can have salespeople that can uncover the problems, the pain side of things, and discuss some of those business elements. But their skill level ends there, and you need a pre-sales practitioner or some technical resource to really be able to dig in to ask the questions. Well, why is this happening? What's going on? What happens when you flip this switch and everything goes sideways for whatever reason? Let's talk about that. And they understand the technology that is causing those things to happen or get in the way or whatsoever. So those two parties need to come together and agree on their roles and responsibilities. And there can be an overlap. So for example, when you're uncovering value, there should be elements of business value that a salesperson should be able to collect and discuss. There should also be elements of value that the technical resource should be able to collect and discuss. Pausing there, once the order is received, discovery should shift to account management and customer success as an ongoing thing. You're looking to renew, which means there may be some discovery that's required to ensure that the prospect understands the use cases that they've enjoyed and the use cases they perhaps have not yet embraced. For expansion, you're in a sales process again, and so discovery again comes to the fore. So it is a team sport, and understanding and agreeing on the roles, I think, becomes a rather important factor in that. Now, subtlety. In many, many organizations today, the pre-sales folks tend to be more veteran than many of their sales counterparts, which means that when you discuss the team sport and who's going to do what, there may be a heavier reliance on the people that have more experience, at least initially, until the newer people come up to speed, and that has to be factored in as well. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm thinking also I don't want to neglect the other parts of the customer journey, the other departments, but marketing and business development. I remember in business development we would have these kind of quick, brief questions, qualifying, but I also want to know that perhaps they could be doing discovery as well. that could probably help increase that success rate, for a close or win rate or technical win or whatever we want to look at metrics for success. But like, how would a marketing department do it? How would the business development team do it? Perform a discovery, perhaps based on your book.
So we actually talk about it in the book. Marketing is typically less likely to actually do real discovery unless they're trying to do it for the purpose of building a new product or a new release, for example. But BDRs and marketing, and if you will, the early stages of trying to get somebody into the funnel, there's a very interesting idea that I came up with just last fall, and that's called lead churn. And that's the idea that a lead could actually churn even to another vendor even before they enter your funnel. And this leads back to the BDR SDR thing. So let me give you the example here, because it happened to me. So this is several years ago. I had reached out to a vendor. I was seriously interested in them, and I clicked on the book a demo button, and about an hour later, a BDR and SDR reached out and contacted me to qualify me. And he or she said, is this an active project? And I said, well, not really. We're just, in the early stages. They said, are you the person in charge? And I said, well, I'm on the board of this company, but it's not really my decision. No, I was on the board of the company. They said, do you have a defined set of needs? And I said, well, we're just putting those together now. They said, do you have this timeline? They basically did BANT, but do you have budget? Do you have the authority? Do you have the need? Do you have the timeline? And because I answered all those either no or inconclusively, guess what happened?
It stopped from there?
Yeah, I never saw a demo. I got nothing but a hearty handshake and a thank you. And I was qualified out.
Wow.
And I was so angry about that. That I learned my lesson. And the next time it happened, when I reached out and clicked the book a demo button, well, I lied gently. When they asked, are you in charge? I said, oh, absolutely. Is this defined project? You betcha. Do you have a budget? Wouldn't live without one. So, I was qualified in, and then I got to see my demo. But here's the kicker. Because I was qualified out by that first organization, I never was going to go back to them ever. So in a marketplace where there are multiple vendors with same or similar offerings, if you qualify a lead who is just browsing and not yet in an active buying process, which is what BDRs and SDRs are designed to do, that person is going to churn to another vendor even before they hit your funnel. So going back to really the essence of your question, what I urge BDRs and SDRs in any initial interaction to do is to not just qualify, but quid pro quo. Do discovery with a mind's eye towards providing the prospect with useful, valuable information vision generation demo, for example, such that the next time let me rephrase, if they're in a just browsing mode, when they actually enter an active buying process, they are predisposed to come back to you because you invested time with them to really begin to help understand their situation, give them some ideas, give them some thinking, give them some vision, if you will, as opposed to just simply say, well, we don't want to waste our salesperson's time with this guy because he's just browsing. How does that sound?
Yeah. Peter, I've done the same thing too, where sometimes, I knew that was what they were going to do. They were going to say, all right, well, it's a yes, no, if you don't fulfill this, we're not going to move forward. And I would have to fib a little bit to get myself, over that line. So yes, I understand.
And so, let me expand on that in two dimensions, because they map very well. We often talk about buyers, and we often talk about champions, but we don't typically ask, and the book goes into intimate detail on this, is, are they experienced buyers? Are they experienced champions? So very simple question, can give you enormous understanding of what you need to do to help your prospect. So for example, if the prospect says, I've bought enterprise software multiple times, and although this is a new company, I know how to go about doing it. Perfect. I can map to that. Conversely, if they say, actually, this is my first time ever in a position where I'm the lead on the buying committee, and yeah, I've never gone through this process before, it should be what that should tell me is that I should give this person some guidance. Hey, I say, you know what? Here's some steps you're likely going to have to go through. Let's embrace those now. Let's put that on the plan so that you and I are not surprised at the end when the purchasing department says, well, before we can execute any kind of PO, we need to have the data review and privacy review stuff done, which is going to take 3 weeks.
Are you enjoying this episode? Please give a like, comment, follow, or subscribe. And now, back to the Tony Moze Podcast.
There's a chicken and the egg concept. You have doing discovery versus great demo. I think one is the chicken, one is the egg. How about this? Doing discovery would be the first book to read, right? Would you say?
So maybe.
Okay.
Here's what I have learned.
Uh-huh.
The very intelligent customer-facing practitioner would read doing discovery first, because that is the single most important element of any sales and buying process. That will, if you will, it's like rain and snow falling on a mountain range that forms into streams, that forms into creeks, that forms into rivers. It impacts everything downstream, and when it's done well, then you have this beautiful river, flowing neatly into the ocean. However, most organizations will read great demo first because their perception is that our demos need to improve, and they're probably right. Mm-hmm. And once they've done that, once they've read it, then they realize, oh, well, in order to get the information we need for a great demo, we probably need to do a better job doing discovery. And so in many cases, they will now go back and read doing discovery. And I've written the 2 books. I'm drafting this 3rd edition of Great Demo, but I've written the book such that they should complement and support one another, regardless of which you start from.
That's awesome. So I'm thinking of agile, working in an agile form. Now they're in the demo portion of it. Could they still be doing discovery within that demo?
Oh, this is discovery on the fly. And the answer is yes. However, be careful. This is a great topic. Most traditional discovery on the fly conversations are a standard overview demo interspersed with questions along the lines of, well, what did you think of this capability? And therefore, they're not great demos. They are demos that are harbor tours that are simply occasionally asking the prospect, hey, what did you think about this so far? So they're at risk of showing way too much, appearing to be complicated, and at risk of buying it back, which we talked about last time as well, versus doing discovery ahead of time and then building a focused, crisp technical proof demo that just is touching on the things that this prospect says they need to know and they need to understand. Now, that being said, as I'm drafting the 3rd edition of Great Demo, I've got a pretty rich chapter on vision generation demos, which is that happy point for both parties, where when the prospect is saying, I just want to get a sense of what's possible, you can deliver that via a vision generation demo, which then moves the prospect and the whole conversation into a discovery call and is designed to do that. So that's a rescue for those types of situations. I'll add one small element and say there are times when doing discovery on the fly is very appropriate. I've detailed some of those in the book, and one of them is highly transactional, or let's say, low dollar value interactions, where you really are trying to get, as a salesperson and to a certain degree as the prospect, you're really just trying to make these conversations very, very rapid. Notwithstanding, you still want to make sure you do sufficient discovery in the mind's eye of the prospect before you propose these solutions. Does that help?
Yeah. So like crossing the chasm, if you think about the different adopters, right? Like who should people really stay away from certain people within that adoption curve?
Yes, stay away from the laggards because
Stay away from the
they don't
laggards.
want to change. And I mean, I put together a presentation a few days ago where I was characterizing what level of proof the various stages need. I wrote nope with a period underneath the laggards because no amount of proof is going to change their perception that I don't want to change. These are the people that are still running Windows 98, and they're basically saying, I'll never leave it because it works. There's no compelling reason to change. On the other hand, discovery should map to the crossing the chasm, the technology adoption curve categories. So, for example, early adopters, technology adopters, they don't need a lot of discovery. Technology adopters don't. They just want to try things out and explore it on their own. When you're talking to early adopters or fast followers, they need less discovery than in folks as you move to the right on the curve. However, you want to emphasize a lot of discovery along the lines of why does this person want an early adopter movement, if you will? Why do they want to be a fast follower? What gains are they looking for? And how do you then implement and drive adoption to help them actually achieve those kinds of advantages that they seek? As you move into the majority, the early majority and late majority, this is where discovery needs to be done richly and completely, because these are the people that, well, the early majority are willing to change, but want to do it in a careful, structured fashion. And so you need to understand all that. The late majority are willing to change, but only because they have to. And again, you need to make them feel comfortable by understanding their situation as richly and completely as possible. So one way to look at this is that discovery and levels of proof increase dramatically as you move to the right on that technology adoption curve. How's
And
that?
where would military and government fit?
Oh man, they. I can't speak about the military because it's too broad a swath. But most forms of government are in the late majority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a shame.
Unless there's an election coming up.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a shame because I remember when I was in the Army. Oh my God, the stuff that we used was so outdated. I mean, like really, it took forever just to get an order form to get it, like maybe something in Microsoft Office. Everything was just still on paper, and I had to worry about those lost.
And God help you if you were suggesting a new software package, right? Hey, this is really good. No. Let me explain. This is the Army way. There's the right way, there's the wrong way, and then there's the armed forces way.
Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more about enablement, right? Because I know so far as sales enablement, where we had a team that taught us the rules of, especially as when I was a BDR, about how we go about the process of calling in, the first words that have to be said, the questions that should be asked, and how to follow up and then close with scheduling them for a meeting. They would teach us that, and they would be called the enablement team. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the buyer enablement versus vendor enablement? What are each sides doing?
So vendor enablement, sales enablement is all about equipping your sales team, pre-sales team, the go-to customer faction, with the tools and the skills and the process steps to go through a sales process, generally speaking. So that means scripts, that means demo tools, that means all the stuff that you need to engage a customer. Buyer enablement is looking at the process from the perspective of what does my buyer need to move his or her process forward as frictionless and rapidly as possible. So in the best case, buyer enablement says, I need to think in terms of my buyer's process and proact. So for example, I'll give you a simple example. I cannot tell you how many times I've been listening to what are purported as discovery calls. And somewhere in the middle of that discovery call, there's a question from the prospect about pricing. And the vendor says, oh, well, I can't give you a good pricing information until I've collected a lot more information about the number of users, the number of modules, the number of this, the number of that, the number of this other thing. And then the buyer, the prospect, is frustrated because the prospect simply wants to know, is this within possibility? Is this, I want a ballpark is what they're saying. And I hear this over and over again. So buyer enablement would say early in one of the very early calls, even if the prospect doesn't bring it up, you might want to suggest, hey, for your budgeting and just future thinking purposes, pricing ranges from this in some of our smaller implementations to this in some of our larger implementations. You will probably be in a range here. And what that enables then is for the prospect to say, oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. And now I know what kind of budgeting, vehicles I need to go through and so forth. So buyer enablement is all in terms of, and it is all about thinking in terms of what does my buyer need to move their journey, their process forward on a time frame and with the least amount of pain and suffering. Does that help explain?
Yeah, and I think earlier, maybe just to clarify, you did talk about I could have sworn you said something about there's two types of people in this process where the vendor says, oh, don't worry, I got this. I could figure this out. We can get this done or whatever. But then there's another vendor who is like, I really don't know much. So can you please, as a buyer, help me, guide me through how your process is?
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely that.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, yeah, because the thing I was thinking about before was like the whole synergy and like really more of like a proactive nature between both sides, really helping each other to get to the conclusion,
Yeah, so that's the definition to a certain degree of a champion, a true champion. So a champion is somebody who wants it to happen, and they're working internally on their side to convince others, to persuade others, to build the business case, et cetera, et cetera. Champion enablement is, if you will, a subset of buyer enablement, and goes through some of the same concepts that I was just mentioning. So, if you're dealing with somebody that's really excited about your software, you want to ask them, hey, have you been in a position where you've championed a vendor through an organization before, or is this something new to you? And if they say, oh, yeah, I've done it 17 times, and you say, great, let me know what your process is, and I'll map to it. And that way we can make this as simple and frictionless as possible. Conversely, your champion may say, I've never done this before. I've never been in a position where I've had to persuade others. Yeah, help me through it. Tony, for example, have you ever raised a PO?
Ooh. Yes.
Yes, but you sounded like, maybe not.
I have helped it. Yeah, I've assisted with it. Yes.
You've assisted with it. Okay, big difference.
Yes.
Going to work, just even the mechanics of working with a purchasing department. I'll give you three simple examples. Number one, as the champion, if you were experienced, you'd say, hey, you know what? We should probably get you started with our vendor onboarding process, because there's a bunch of stuff you have to go through and fill out, and it takes some time for purchasing to get it all validated and stood up. Okay, so champion who's experienced would tell you that. Buyer enablement would tell us as vendors to ask our champion, should we begin the vendor onboarding process now so it doesn't hit us in the face a week before we want to try to execute a purchase agreement and a purchase order type of thing? Does that all resonate?
Yeah, it does. I always have questions because another thing that pops up is you used it in your last book, Crossing the Chasm. You used some references from there. I mean, about the
nice book.
Yeah, I mean, and I love the illustration of the different types of adoptions, the different types of adopters, right? The laggards versus the innovators and the fast forwarders, as you said in your book. I mean, it had me thinking about a lot of these things. But how about this? I have a creative question. We talked about your book. I feel it's beating homegrown. Personally, this is what I believe. It's beating homegrown. It's not. It has a journey, right? There's this kind of flow to it, that's going to help a lot of people. A pretty good guardrail. I feel it's accessible to a broader population. I said this is a baseline, so it brings up this idea. I know, Peter, you worked in and around academia, right? It leads me to ask: do you think there should be empirical studies done on pre-sales? I mean, like, first off, how much research, is actually being backed with in tech sales, pre-sales?
So the answer is a violent yes. And with tools like Gong and Chorus and related, where you can actually record calls, with AI tools where you can actually take a look at the transcriptions and tease out, when are they talking about X, Y, and Z, and what are the responses? What are even the emotional responses? Oh yeah, we've got the ability now to begin to really characterize this stuff reasonably intimately. So the time is ripe to take a look at that. Has it been done to date? I would say sparsely. Gong has done some studies. Some other organizations have done some studies. Each vendor tends to take a look, if they're sort of intelligent, at some of their discovery and demo calls and customer success calls to again understand, where are things going well and where could things improve. But we're right on the cusp of this, absolutely.
So do you think? Are people deliberately, say one who's writing one's master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation, doing, putting emphasis into this area, or is this still more of like a business, like research type thing?
I don't know. I would love to find out. I would assume that there's both sets of parties are working on this.
Yeah.
At the end of each day, and it's each day, sales, let me rephrase, revenue leaders, not just sales leaders, but revenue leaders want to improve their processes. They want to make them as efficient, as effective as possible. And that means critical examination of metrics, and then critical examination of the leading and lagging indicators that contribute to those metrics. That's what, to a certain degree, that's what sales operations is all about, or revenue operations is all about, is understanding, where could we be doing better? Where are we doing well? How do we sharpen this that much further? Discovery is an area that I think is very ripe for that, but it requires a lot of analysis, because discovery conversation, let's go back a small step. Let's talk about the difference just very briefly between buying tools and buying enterprise solutions. So way back around 1998, I was leading a team and I had a pile of engineers working for me, and I knew what they did. They designed stuff, but I was not intimate with their needs or their processes. And they came to me at one point and said, hey, there's 12 of us. We want 12 copies of a CAD tool called SolidWorks. I said, terrific. Tell me which version and what modules you'll need, and I'll get it. And I did. So I reached out to the SolidWorks rep, and I said, I need 12 copies of SolidWorks with these modules and this version and so forth. And I placed an order. Was any discovery needed for that? No, because I was simply buying tools. These guys knew exactly what they needed. My job was just to get those copies for them and bring them on board. On the other hand, when we went to buy a CRM system, we didn't have any insight into what was possible. We didn't have any insight to what was available, and we really didn't even have crystal clarity on our needs. And so we needed a vendor to come in and help guide us through that process. Sadly, only one of about 7 vendors actually did that well. And we ended up, by the way, going with that vendor, even though in retrospect, it wasn't the best offering. but the vendor did a terrific job in terms of going through discovery, helping us understand our needs, quantify the value, define the impact of things. He re-engineered vision. He's like, there's some capabilities here you might be interested in. You haven't asked about them yet, but let me describe what they are and how other folks have enjoyed using these capabilities and what the rewards were like. Those are biased questions, by the way. And we went, oh, wow, we had no idea. That's really cool. Yes, we want those capabilities as well. So, the moral of the story here is that there are tools for which discovery is probably not needed or very, very thin, versus large enterprise solutions where the vendor and the prospect really need to have a conversation, and a rich conversation over a period of time, to really map out exactly what's needed and how to implement it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, yeah. And look, I mean, I asked the question because Okay, well, you're talking about solutions and tools, right? I know that Salesforce now allows for MedPick to go in there, and salespeople could, document that, throughout the whole cycle. Now I'm thinking about your methodology potentially being inside of a Salesforce as a plugin. But then the next thing it leads me into is perhaps venture capitalists saying, all right, well, what's the empirical research behind it? Like maybe one VC might want to hear that story, but that's why I was curious to see, will pre-sales, because I feel this is still a new phenomena in this tech space, in this world, and is that going to now since it's in the ether now, pre-sales, are we going to start having journals, periodicals where people are performing theses and dissertations on this area, much like how sales has taken psychological research and implemented into their sales strategies? These were just thoughts that came up in my head.
So I'm going to say, yeah, I certainly hope so. The doing discovery methodology, as laid out in the book, is based on a small amount of real life research, but it's largely based on an enormous breadth of experiences from me, experiences from team members, experiences from others that I've communicated with and collaborated with. So it's less based on hard science, but it's based on, if you will, pragmatic understanding of the way that people tend to operate. And to give you a sense of this, there's I have a colleague who refers to something called the doorknob effect. And this has to do with real life doctors in hospitals who meet with patients. And now, to set the stage for a little bit, and I mapped this out in the book. When a patient comes to the hospital because they're concerned about a pain that has not gone away, it's getting worse, they're concerned, they're worried. Interestingly, the hospital's process is, hey, before you see a doctor, we need to capture some demographics information. We need to learn about your insurance, because we want you to pay for this, but we also want to know about your history, your meds history, your physical history, your physiology nature, your blood workup, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you fill all that out. That's demographic stuff. And even before you get to see the doctor, you go to a nurse's station where they sort of lead you towards the diagnostic room. They take your vitals, your blood pressure, your temperature, your height, your weight. And then finally, after all that, you finally see a doctor. And this is where the doorknob effect comes in. It's really intriguing. You go and you see a doctor, and the doctor says, so how are things going? You say, well, it's going okay. But I do have this pain that I'm a little bit concerned about. And the doctor asks some questions, and you go through it. And what's intriguing is the doorknob effect is the following. As the conversation appears to have concluded, the patient is reaching for the door knob to go out, and as they just about to turn the knob, they say, there's one more thing. There's one more thing that has concerned me, and that's that I'm also feeling XYZ, whatever. And that's when the doctor says, aha, that's the real problem behind the problem. It's not just that I have a pain in my stomach, it's that I'm concerned about the shooting pain that goes from my stomach down into my leg that the patient hadn't articulated earlier in the engagement. So there's trust, authenticity. There's that discomfort associated with admitting deep pain, because when you admit deep pain, you're scared.
Yeah.
Does that resonate?
Yeah. It has me going back to academia, empirical research, and, you have the manipulation group, the control group and whatnot, as they would do in studies. Could there be confoundings, between the person doing the discovery versus the customer with how the question is asked, and another variable around the question, like time of day, weather, if it's Q1 versus 4, if the sales team is in fear mode because they're not reaching the quota, maybe on both ends they have a product issue or a rollback that put either side in predicament, perhaps jeopardizes how they position the business, etc. Like, what could be your hypothesis or ready-made solutions to these type of confoundings? How can people control for that?
So probably the easiest way to express this is that discovery discovery should be perceived as being done for the benefit of both parties, the vendor and the prospect. And I said this a little bit earlier. The vendor should execute discovery to the level where the vendor feels confident to be able to propose a precise solution to the prospect's situation. And the prospect should feel that the vendor has asked sufficient questions to be able to propose that solution. When both of those things are true, then you've had a productive discovery conversation. And this goes back to a little bit of the curse of knowledge, because I cannot tell you how many times a prospect will simply say, yeah, we want to do a digital transformation. Right now, it's all manual. And the vendor says, great, that's all I need to know. Because the vendor in his or her mind is thinking, all right, great. Yeah, I know what's going to happen next. It's all these things. We always go through this.
Yeah.
But the prospect has not felt heard at that point, and the discovery is therefore insufficient. So even though the vendor has done this 100 times, the vendor still needs to ask those sufficient questions to where the prospect feels they've unwound enough of their situation that the vendor understands them and has heard them sufficiently. That's something we could actually track and measure in studies using Gong, academia, whatsoever, Gong, of course, whatever, and really begin to tease that out. This, by the way, this goes to one of the stories in the book, and I love the story. I was about 90 minutes into a series of discovery conversations with a prospect. It was the second call. We were about, 30, 45 minutes into it. And she said, unbidden, she says, you've already closed me. And I was sort of surprised. I said, no, I didn't, but many thanks for sharing. And what had apparently happened is that she felt I understood her situation so intimately at that point that whatever I was going to propose was going to be, as a solution, was going to be a strong and good fit for her. So that's an example where both parties feel they have had a sufficient exchange for the vendor to be able to propose that precise solution, and for the prospect to feel that the vendor understands them sufficiently to be able to propose that precise solution. That can be measured.
Wow. So, I mean, like, look, you have 7 levels. I mean, if you look at the back of the book, I felt you had more. I felt like your book is very extensive, like, which is awesome because, again, like, you really could get to the depth of things. You know, you say things, if you're looking at the book, level 1 uncovers statements of pain, level 5 uncovers pain, all the way goes into engineers vision, and level 7 integrates and aligns the skills. But then I want to say that the core of all these put together is really the human, really getting down to the human level and showing them, look, I care. I really understand you. Like, I think if I use those words, that's what this all encompasses, right?
That is exactly the case. That couldn't have been articulated any better.
So, like, the last question is too, do you think, is there ever a threshold where there's just too much discovery for this one particular company customer? Would like 30 be like, oh my God, that's overkill? I mean, is there ever a threshold that's too much or too little?
So I would always err towards too much. And to a certain, let me share with you my very favorite discovery question, because it's a great way of asking that in the form of a question to a prospect. And the question is there anything I haven't asked that I should be asking? And you get two sets of answers. The first is, no, I think you've covered it pretty well. And the other is, oh yeah, actually there is one other thing. And that is what makes that question so delightful. It's the prospect telling you that either, check, I'm good, you've asked everything we need to ask from their perspective, or, oh no, you know what, you did miss something that's very important to me. So that's a great way to test that equation. But I would always recommend erring on more than less.
Awesome. Peter, I could ask questions for days because I'm always so intrigued. This is definitely helping myself, but also my newbie pre-sales sales peers. But also everyone else I know who are listening to are seasoned. They tune into this and they're like, man, I'm super happy that you asked these questions. either they would have asked it or they're very thankful that I asked it for them. But Peter, really, thank you so much for this time, and I really appreciate this book. Looking forward to your next books too.
It's truly my pleasure, my honor to join you today. I hope the folks that are listening to this find this useful, and as usual, we both look forward to any questions you might have.
If you enjoyed this episode, remember to like, comment, follow, or subscribe. And for more information, be sure to check out the description. Thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you again for the next episodes of the Tony Moze Podcast.